all situated. Welcome. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
We should have probably just been recording our conversation all along because it's kind of fun.
The B-roll.
Yeah, exactly. Could have kept talking forever. So for all of you who don't know who this man is, this is Mr. Connor Beaton. Most people that listen to this podcast obviously know who you are because I talk about you quite a bit. If you don't, he is the host of the podcast Man Talks and this wonderful book right here, Men's Work, A Practical Guide to Face Your Darkness in Self-Sabotage and Find Freedom. It's quite a title. Makes you want to read it. So I first found you on Chris Williamson's podcast, actually. I think circa 2022 or 3. Maybe it was your first or second time on there. And I was like, man, this guy likes Jung and likes Buddhism and holy shit, he knows Dewey Freeman. I went to Naropa and I was like, I got to find out more about this guy. So I signed up for your retreat, the men's weekend, and then I just jumped in from there. I probably have funded a few of your personal vacations with all the trainings and mentoring I've done under you. And now it's cool. I can check in on you and see how you're doing. It's been a cool development. So welcome, all my men in my practice. Really excited for this episode. So let's start with your book. I love the first title. The work of men begins with pain, and we seem to be okay with physical pain as men. You know, rub some dirt in it, we get on with it. But emotional and psychological, not so much. So when you picked that sentence to open your book, what was that about?
I mean, there was a few different threads to it. One was personal experience of my avoidance of my own personal pain for so long was the exact thing that caused collapse in my life and chaos and sabotage and destruction.
Uh-huh.
And so part of it was simply just acknowledging the path that I had to walk to have a more robust understanding of who I am. And then seeing men throughout, the last decade of working with guys who have done the exact same thing, where they've avoided pain, they've avoided their suffering, they pretend like it's not happening, they use all types of, methods like weed and booze and women and porn to try and avoid it. And that ends up causing chaos and collapsing their life. So, there's sort of a multitude of different things, but I think at the heart of it, I didn't talk about this in the book because it's a little bit more abstract, but I think at the heart of it, it is a masculine path to move towards suffering. And there's a kind of psychological truth and dichotomy where when you avoid pain and suffering, you become more fragile. You become inherently weaker, psychologically, emotionally, physically. And as men, we don't want that. We want to be robust. We know that in order to be of greatest service to the world, we have to develop a kind of resiliency. You could call it. You just think about it as like the calluses, psychologically and emotionally. That you have some level of grit and resiliency within you. And I think for many men, what ends up happening is that the experiences of their life don't actually support them in developing that resiliency, in learning how to alchemize pain into meaning or purpose. And so what ends up happening is that they're just carrying around the heavy weight and burden of childhood hurt, relational dysfunction, career fuck-ups, financial, poor financial decisions. And it just starts to accumulate and amass. And what happens is that a man will get to his 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, and he's just carrying around these, he's sort of like walking around with cement blocks on his feet. And those cement blocks are the accumulation of all the pain that he's never dealt with. And honestly, that as a society, we've sort of dropped the ball in being able to teach men what to do with that.
Yeah.
how to actually navigate through it. And so I started the book there because I do think that for men in our modern culture, that is the primary work. And Jung said, if you can deal with your shadow, you've done something. Basically, you've done something great for humanity. That if you as a man can face and confront your shadow, your own pain, your own suffering, your own dysfunction, that yes, you've done something meaningful for yourself, but you've actually done something meaningful to alleviate the suffering of the collective.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself, just that in itself, if you really sit with it and tune into it, there's something not only noble about it, but there's something inherently meaningful and purpose inducing.
Mm.
So when we have a vacuum of meaning, when we have a vacuum of purpose, it's helpful to give men, which we do in our culture today. I would argue that we have a vacuum of meaning and purpose. It's
For sure.
helpful to give men direction of here's where you can actually locate meaning. Here's where you can locate purpose. And unfortunately, it's usually not in the spots and places that we want it to be. We're sort of sold this idea through modernity and modern culture that it should be found on the couch watching Netflix or rubbing what off, watching your favorite porn video. And it's
Right.
just not there, right? It's just never there. And it's so disheartening and frustrating.
Mm.
But it's always in the places where we have to meet some type of psychological, emotional, or physical edge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we use things to numb out, check out to avoid it. I think I was listening to a clip with you and John Wineland, and he was saying that pain sort of it can become your initiation into the trek to manhood. And yeah, we're not given a whole lot of good instruction in our culture, largely because of maybe absent fathers or their fathers being absent, and maybe that's due down to trauma and war and all that. So I like that idea of the pain being your initiation into manhood. That's kind of what you meant, like facing the pain is your initiation.
Yeah, well, when you look at initiatory processes and structures in different cultures, one of the main points that a man or a young boy is meant to endure is to go through pain, psychologically, physically, emotionally, and to be able to understand who he becomes in the face of that pain. And more specifically, to understand who he becomes when he's powerless. Because when you go through an initiation, there is a very big element of powerlessness. Like
Mm.
you cannot dominate your way out of it. You cannot crush your way out of it. You just cannot submit the experience of initiation. You can't force it to submit. And Richard Rohr said that, unless a man goes through a journey of powerlessness, he'll always abuse power. And,
Interesting.
and so I think in order for us to reconcile as men with our own power, with our own strengths, with our own physical power, our own intellectual power, our own emotional power, we do have to go through experiences where we really get a behind the scenes look at who we actually are when we feel helpless and powerless.
Mm.
And for a lot of men, that's challenging because they likely have experienced moments of powerlessness or helpless that were traumatic, that were
Yeah.
abusive.
Right.
And so to go back into that place is to be forced to reconcile with their own trauma, with their own pain, with their own, with their own abuse or healing or whatever that is. And so it's a complicated thing. And when you couple that with the fact that we generally do not have initiatory rites of passage in our culture anymore today,
No.
what you get is men producing, men producing a kind of pseudo initiation, which is what I did, which is in the absence of a traditional initiation, you basically nuke your life. You crater your job, you crater your relationship, you crater your health, your finances, whatever it is. And you see if you can survive that. And it's an unconscious initiation process. So even if we strip initiation out of the culture, even if we don't give men an initiatory process, they will still try and produce that in their own life.
Mm.
Because I think, if Jung was in this conversation with us, he would probably say that there's an archetypal nature within men, within the animus that wants to move towards initiation.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a young boy is not given an initiation, a proper one into manhood, then his psyche will actually produce it in his life at some point. And this is why you see the midlife crisis, right? Which
100%.
James
Yeah.
Hollis has talked about as, the middle passage, which I think is a much
Mhm.
better way of talking about it. But uninitiated men get to the middle of their life, and they end up cratering things because they've never slowed down enough to really say, is this what I want? Am I serving something greater than myself? Does my life have meaning? Am I just checking off the boxes? Do I feel satisfied and fulfilled in my life? Do I actually like who I am? And so what happens is that, again, they sort of pull the pin on the grenade of their life and throw it in and blow some shit up, and
Mhm.
then try and climb their way out of it. And for me, like, that's cool and all, but I would also like to help men go through that process consciously and
Yes.
intentionally, and without having to like bleed out all over the people that are around them, and cause unnecessary damage. I think every man wants that. No man really wants to blow his life up in such a way where he causes harm and duress to other people.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, that completely fits. I think Dr. Hollis has talked about it as the midlife transition versus the crisis. And the crisis is sort of when the ego gets involved. The psyche's pushing you to like live, man. You're not doing what you meant to do. What's calling you to live and be in this world? And the ego gets involved. It's like, let's get a motorcycle and drive fast because it makes you feel alive, right? But it can cause problems. But that does make sense that there's sort of some sort of archetypal aspect to the animus that is just innate within us. And if we get that in a healthy way, we don't have to blow our lives up. But maybe that explains a lot of wild things we're seeing around, like school shootings and violence and like weird initiatory processes gone off the rails. And some of these guys I see come in wanting to work on the midlife crisis in my practice, and it is sort of guiding them through, as you said, like a healthy way to do it, paying attention, and it's sort of it's a marathon, right? You can't figure it out overnight. You got to like live out the question: what does the psyche want from me? What does my soul want from me? If you want to use Jungian terms, what is whatever it is inside you want from me, rather than like what does the ego wants? Because the ego is going to give you some pretty interesting options, let's say.
Well, I mean, here's the thing that I think maybe doesn't get talked about enough, because the ego kind of gets a bad rap, in different forms of psychology, mostly
Sure.
because it's like the thing that we're trying to escape sometimes, or it's the part of us that has been labeled as the causer of dysfunction.
Right,
Maybe you could
right.
say it that way. It's
Yeah.
like
The selfish part.
yeah, the ambivalent, angry teenager that's just like causing a shitstorm in our life.
Mhm.
But the ego and the identity is largely an amalgamation of patterns,
Mm.
that over the course of time, you've amassed those patterns, and you've amassed those patterns because they are predictable. Your brain has
Yeah.
identified those patterns as things that work in some
Mhm.
way, work to solve a problem, work to have you be perceived a certain way. And your brain will always choose patterns that it recognizes over patterns that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so your identity is this big mass of these behavioral patterns. And a lot of the times, those patterns have not been consciously chosen. They have just been unconsciously installed through your childhood, through your upbringing, through being on certain sport teams and school environments, and whether you were bullied or not. And
Mhm.
it's a lot of reactionary patterns
Mhm.
to the environment that you are in. Some of them, I would say, are inherent in different individuals, and then a lot of the patterns are produced through the experiences that they go through. So a
Mhm.
part of what we have to do is look at the pre-existing patterns that we have adopted throughout life that make up our identity, and then start to question them, start to work with them, and really ask, do these patterns serve me? Do I actually want to keep these patterns going? And so how we shift our sense of self-perception, how we shift our identity, is by actually looking at these behavioral patterns and then beginning to change the behavioral patterns to be less maladaptive, aka sabotage oriented, and to be more generative in nature, to be more healthy, aligned, congruent. And that produces a different identity, that produces a different outcome, both externally and internally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And I like in your book how open you were about where you started, and you were, I think it was the part of the book where you're afraid to tell your friend like how much you were hurting, and you did, and he's like, "Oh yeah, me too."
Yeah.
And that was like, that broke the dam of like, oh, I'm not alone in this.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I wrote about in the book is that in male culture, it is quite common and acceptable to try and develop psychological, physical, and emotional strength through suppression of unwanted thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, right? So like strength equals suppression, or suppression equals
Right.
strength within a lot of masculine male culture, which I think we can all agree on doesn't actually work very well in the long term. It might produce some short-term
Right.
avoidance tactics where you can feign strength, you can pretend, and you can create a mask of strength, but it doesn't actually produce the roots are very shallow to that. And we want to grow deeper roots when it comes to resiliency and actually developing psychological and emotional strength. So we have to move out of this pattern of choosing to suppress things and lying to ourselves that it is making us strong.
Right.
It doesn't. And I mean, a simple example of this is maybe this won't resonate with everybody, but if you look at war tactics, this one of the worst things that you can do from a game theory or war tactics perspective is ignore your own weaknesses. That is a surefire way to get you killed. Period. That is a surefire way to let the quote unquote enemy win.
Correct.
And so if we wouldn't do that from a war tactics perspective, because like if you want to be successful in times of battle, the thing that you need to understand in a very meaningful and robust way is, what are your possible weaknesses? What are the things that could cause you to be attacked? How are you going to get flanked? Those types of things. And so same thing goes psychologically. We need to understand our weaknesses without villainizing them, without causing them to be more of a shame mechanism for us. We need to be able to integrate those things. And unless we do that, those perceived weaknesses are going to run our lives, right? And this is why Jung said, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it'll direct your life and you'll call it fate. What he's really saying is, unless you start to look at the things about yourself that you do not like, that you do not want to admit, that you're afraid of, and you start to bring those into conscious awareness, those elements of you psychologically and emotionally are going to make decisions for you, and they're going to direct your life, right? So I think in the book, I referenced Francis Weller, who said, your pain has its own intelligence. And I think that is so true, right? Your shadow, your pain has its own intelligence. It's trying to assimilate into the totality of your identity and your ego construct and structure. And if you are in active avoidance or suppression of that pain, of those perceived weaknesses or insecurities, like they are just going to F your life up. Like they're just going to continue to cause chaos. It's like the kid. It's like raising a kid. If you ignore the kid and it's like completely, it's throwing paint against the walls and they're, punching holes in the walls, and you're like, oh, whatever. It's probably just going to keep doing that shit because you're not in relationship to it. So we have to build a relationship with these elements and these parts of ourselves. And that is hard for a lot of men. It is hard to just say, this feels like a weakness to me. I'm insecure in this way. I'm hurting in this way. And to turn towards those truths is a very important first step. Jung said the first step in any therapeutic process is confession. And it's the same in every religion. And so at the sort of first thing that every man must do is admit to the pain he's carrying, admit to the dysfunction that is happening in his life, admit to the fears and the insecurities and the weaknesses that he has inside of him that it's very likely that he has never communicated to another human being on the planet. And I
Mhm.
can't tell you how many men I've worked with where they've done the therapy, they've worked with the psychologist, they've gone to the coaches, and they still have never talked about really big parts of their life and their past, the
Yeah.
abuse, trauma, things that they
Mhm.
have shame around. I mean, it's baffling.
Mhm.
So, and I was the exact same way. So,
Yeah, for sure. I think that takes a massive act of courage to go there, because we don't like that. No human does, but I think guys perceive it as weakness. Or even I have some guys are like, well, I don't want to tell my spouse about that because I don't want to have her to carry that burden or whatever. So they just kind of hold it. I don't want to tell my kids that. I don't want them to know. And it just, yeah, it festers. And then if it's unconscious, you'll think, oh, that's just the way life is. And this is my fate. And a lot of guys will come and go, how do I unfuck my life? What do I do? Is that the first step? Is just
yes.
confession?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the most uncomfortable step.
Sure is.
It really is. And I mean, like I wrote about in the book, like I moved my stuff into storage. I moved into the back of my car for, 2+ weeks because I didn't want people to know about what was happening in my life, about how I had screwed up, about how I had lied, how I had cheated, how I was suffering. I just didn't want people to know about it. And part of it was because I was ashamed. But the other part of it was that I wanted to continue to keep maintaining this illusion of who I was,
Right.
So, and that's the hard part. Again, your identity, your ego structure, it doesn't want to change. It does not want to shift. It prefers those patterns, those behavioral patterns, even when they're dysfunctional. It wants to choose those dysfunctional behaviors of porn and weed and women and booze and lying and cheating and whatever it is. It wants to choose those things because those are known, those are safe,
Safe. Yeah.
those produce a result. They help to alleviate something that's happening inside of you that's uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And so it can feel like death beginning to admit that some of these things exist, beginning to admit where you are maybe fallible,
Uh,
or failing or have a weakness or feel insecure,
uh,
or are just, straight up in pain.
yeah, it sounds like a grieving process in a way.
Totally.
Yeah, and then, of course, we don't want to feel that either, but that's the way is through. How can I get a lot of questions from women who have, well, maybe emotionally boys, but men in their life. How do they support them? Like, a lot of times, men come in, they're like, my wife made me come, or I have to fix this so I can fix my relationship. It's like they would have never have come in without a spouse being like, dude, you need to go. I don't know if that's the best setup, but how can women support them in doing this process without mothering them? Because I think that's a lot of the problem too. Like, I guess I have to be the mom in the relationship because homeboy is not getting his act together. What's the healthy way to do that for women?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky situation. I think, as you're saying, don't try and solve his problems for him. I think some women go down therapeutic rabbit holes to try and amass information to support their partner and end up inadvertently becoming their boyfriend, their husband's, yeah, like pseudo therapist,
Yeah,
or their mother trying to parent them and caretake them. And that collapses the sexual polarity in the relationship,
yeah.
which causes all kinds of other issues.
Hmm.
So it's challenging, right? I like to see that women are generally the permission card holders for a lot of men.
Uh,
A lot of men, especially the nice guys, will have largely dysfunctional relationships with other men. So they don't trust other men. They won't
mhm.
be receptive to other men's feedback. They won't be receptive to eliciting feedback from other men. They will not trust that they can actually expose some of the pain, the suffering, the challenges, the weaknesses that they're going through to other men. And so instead of trying to fix his problems for him, continue to encourage him to find solutions for himself. And like I said, I think for many men, the women in their lives actually hold a kind of permission card that says, I'm not going to think any less of you if you go do this. I will love you. I will love you just as you are, and I will love you more. I will love you through it. My love for you will not change if you change. I'm not saying that you have to change. I'm not saying that you're broken or dysfunctional right now as you are, because a lot of men hear that. What I'm saying is, I love you as you are right now. And I know from what you have said to me that you want something different for yourself. And I want that for you as well. And so in doing this, I think some of the best relationships between men and women in an intimate relationship is either when the woman kind of takes on more of like a real, meaningful, genuine cheerleader role. Like she just loves kind of cheering for and admiring her man, her boyfriend, her husband, or she takes on a kind of like, I don't want to say operations. That's not the right word, but more of like a logistical support role of you're going to take the charge on this, and I'm going to kind of work with you to deal with some of these things or to encourage you. But regardless of where you stand, admiration and encouragement for a man is like jet fuel.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
It's like jet fuel. And so I think if you give him permission in your own way, and every woman listening to this conversation will know her husband, know her boyfriend far better than I do, because I don't know them. But being able to say, I know you don't need my permission, but I want you to know that if you did go down this path of reading that book, of going to that men's group, of going to see a therapist or a psychologist or a coach, I won't think any less of you. It will not change my perception of your strength. It will actually make you stronger in my eyes, because I will know that you're doing something hard that is challenging and confronting for you. And I love that. And I think that those words right there are keys to a man, because he's like, oh, you're going to see me as robust and strong if I go do this confronting thing that I'm maybe scared of doing, or I have judgment around, or I have shame around, or whatever narrative and story I have. So I think for a lot of men, they actually need that permission. And I think for a lot of women, what happens is they go online and they view Instagram content that tells them inadvertently that they should be fixing their man. Tell him that he's an anxious attached man. Tell him that he's avoidant. Point out his avoidant tendencies, and they just, it creates a shitstorm. And so, send him a book and say, hey, you don't have to read this, but I thought you might like it. Read it if you want. Send him a podcast. I thought you might enjoy this. Check it out. If you don't, it's not for you. No worries. Versus the ultimatums that men are often given. You have to listen to this. You need to read this. And for a lot of men, what they hear in that is a reinforcement of, oh, you think there's something wrong with me and I'm broken. And so, so that creates more natural resistance.
Yeah, for sure. That resonates with what I've experienced. Things we've talked about before, and you talked about in your podcast, is getting men into their bodies and out of their heads. We're walking around in the logos quite a bit.
Love that logos.
Love that. Yeah, we sure do.
Love that logos. Ooh, give me that rational thought. Just let me smoke a little bit more of my own inner fucking dialogue.
Exactly. It makes sense. It's logical. It's black and white. And I don't have to struggle too much with it.
Done and done.
Yeah. And then we go down into the body, and the emotions is like, whoa, that's nonlinear. That's circular. That doesn't make sense. Let's run away. But it seems like when you marry the two, that's where the juice is. That's where things get going. When you have, as you said, the direct felt experience, things shift. There's a lot more wisdom and information. I always say, what's going on from your throat to your belly button. If you want to call it the chakra system, you can. But like, there's something going on right there. And a lot of guys, when I first do that, they're like,
don't forget the balls, Miles.
Oh,
What
yeah,
about the,
we can go to the balls. Yeah,
or
yeah.
I was
I'm
going to make it
neutering us.
even worse. Like, don't forget the taint.
What's going on from your throat to
This
your
is gonna be
taint?
this is gonna be a very different conversation than most of the other ones. just gonna fuck around.
Yeah. I think my guys can handle it, but
Hopefully.
hopefully, yeah, you gotta be careful. But yeah, we don't want to forget the balls. It's important. But going there seems to unlock something. There's a lot of more information. And a lot of times when I have guys go there, they'll just say they don't feel anything at first, which is not surprising because
Yeah.
they haven't really accessed that part of them. What's the magic? How do we do it? What should guys do?
Well, first you have to have I do think that you have to have some type of logical understanding of why it's relevant and important.
Makes sense.
And we don't usually do things that we don't have a valuable case for. And this is where I find a lot of men get stuck, is that they've never really found enough of a reason to go into their body. And the story that they hold internally is, if I do that, there's nothing but negative consequences that are going to happen. I'm going to start to feel it's going to mess up my ability to perform at work. I'm going to be perceived different. People are going to think I'm weak. Maybe my wife or my girlfriend's going to think I'm weak. And the reality is the complete opposite, that if you want to have any type of emotional sovereignty, any type of emotional resiliency, you have to understand the emotions that are happening inside of you.
Mm.
So the way I look at it is, I gave this analogy to I was working with a stock trader. He's like one of the top stock traders on Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
And he had been sent to me, he was having a little bit he was having a hard time with his career, but he was also dealing with immense amounts of anxiety and panic attacks and that kind of stuff. And so he came to work with me. And his whole thing was like, why should I feel my feelings? Like, why should I even bother doing that? And I said, okay, imagine this. Imagine that you went to trade a stock, take Tesla or Apple, choose a stock, whichever one you want. And as you were going to choose the stock, you didn't look at any of the data or the information about the company's performance. You didn't look at the profit and loss statement. You didn't look at the history of how the company had been performing. You didn't look at any of that information. Do you think that you would be making a good trade? And he's like, absolutely not. And I said, okay, well, that is how you've been making decisions in your life. That's how you've been making decisions. Because when you cut yourself off from the data and the information of your emotions, of your physical body, you are missing out on arguably 70 to 80% of the data and the information that is necessary for you to make decisions and choices in your intimate relationship, in your health, in your finances. And those are the things, that's the data and the information that, by ignoring it, is causing you to make poor decisions. So you have a net negative outcome that is happening by ignoring this. So I just want to make that case first, because there is a really strong resistance towards getting into the body for men. And there's a really strong resistance for it because we've been told not to, it's pointless, it doesn't matter. But also because the body is the realm of the unconscious and it's the realm of emotions. And for men, that feels chaotic, that feels unknown, that's frightening, right? The brain encodes anything chaotic and unknown as a threat. And so for the majority of men, when you say, let's feel your feelings, let's get into your body, there's actually a threat response that happens in the brain. The brain says, that is dangerous. I shouldn't do that. And so we have to acknowledge that you're having a threat response by, going in to feel your feelings. So with all that said, how do we do it? How do we get into the body? The easiest and simplest way is just through your breath. Your breath is the conduit. It's the vehicle into the body. It is the vehicle that's going to bring you into contact with physical sensations. It's the vehicle that's going to bring you into contact with emotional sensations in the body or energetic sensation. And it is the vehicle that's going to help you to either upregulate your body, so actually move into a more doing oriented state, or it's going to help you to downregulate your body and actually help you to calm your nervous system, to calm you when you're under stress, under duress, when you're anxious, when you're bored, when you're stressed out and you want to go and watch porn, even though you've told yourself that you don't want to do that. So the breath is the way in. For me, this is I realized this in hindsight because I got a degree in music.
That's right.
And so I literally spent 4 years doing breathwork training, inadvertently, because I was a singer. And so I spent a ton of time doing all of these, what I thought at the time were annoying, stupid breathing exercises where, I'd have to breathe in through my nose for a count of 4, and then, for a count of 20 or 30. And I'd have to do that constantly. And when I first started doing it, what I became acutely aware of was the overwhelming amount of tension and stress that were in my body. I was a former hockey player. I worked construction. I lifted weights a ton. And when I started doing these breathing exercises, what I came into contact with was heat, tension, stress, and anger. And so immediately I was like, well, why the fuck am I doing this? This is so dumb.
I don't like this.
I don't like this. Like, why am I having to do this? And I remember having a conversation with my first mentor, Bernard, who was in my music life, but also sort of he introduced me to Jungian psychology. And he said, well, that's good, valuable information, because you can't produce art from this place of extreme anger and tension and heat. But this is the natural state that you've been existing in. And he's like, it's probably because you're in a fight response most of the time because of your past.
Right.
And so the breath, if you just do simple breathing exercises, right? Sit down, close your eyes, breathe in and out through your nose for 4 or 5 minutes, and just try and bring your awareness to your breath and watch the breath enter into the body, and notice the tension spots in your body. Notice where there's heat, notice where there's cold, notice where there's tightness, notice where there's maybe a different quality of energy, a real heaviness in the body, and just start to observe what happens inside of you when you breathe. I think for a lot of guys, what ends up happening is they go into therapy or they see a coach or a psychologist, and what they're asked is, well, what are you feeling and where do you feel that? And their response is, I don't know, and I have no clue, right? Because there's no conditioning, there's no training that's happened. So the best thing you can do if you're really not sure is, in moments of stress, sit down, close your eyes, set a timer for 4 or 5 minutes, and just breathe and ask yourself one question. What am I experiencing inside of myself right now? What am I actually experiencing? What physical responses am I experiencing? What energetic qualities am I experiencing? What's the charge that I'm having inside of my body? Emotions are just charges, right? They're just energetic charges. That's why we call it, emotion, energy in motion. And so each emotion has a different energetic blueprint or signature. And for each man, they're going to experience it differently. So I'll give you an example for me, because this might help some guys. When I start to get angry and I start to feel like anger is building up, first off, for every single man that I have ever worked with, anger works relatively the same way, which is that it starts somewhere in their core, the core of their body, the center column of their body. And then as they get angrier, the anger moves up their body and into their head. This is why we say, oh, I saw red, or I just lost it. Well, what did you lose? You lost consciousness, because that energy, that energetic emotion moved up into your head and sort of took over your conscious processing, right? So for me, anger starts in my chest. I know it's happening because it feels like Tony Stark's Iron Man suit where that thing in his chest just like turns on. That's exactly what happens for me. It's like something in my chest gets activated. It's a huge amount of energy. It feels like a sun has all of a sudden just appeared in my chest. And then energy starts to radiate out, like physically out in front of me, and then out and down my arms and down my body. And as I get more and more upset, that sun, that sort of mass of energy starts to move up into my head. So that might sound like a great description to some people that have no reference for it. But the point is, you don't have to have mastery over this to begin with. It's about developing awareness of the energy that's happening in your body and the physical markers for it, and beginning to build a kind of dialogue or vocabulary around it. And how you do that is through the breath. You cannot connect to your body. You cannot connect to your emotions without some type of connection to the breath. It is the conduit. It's like the bridge. It's the guide that pulls you into your physical body and your emotions.
The archetypal Hermes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
for all those Jungians out there.
Yeah.
That makes me think of attachment theory in a way. We don't have to go deep into that. We can if we want to. And I remember, maybe it was you were talking about in a podcast how boys we stop being touched at a certain age, and the girls constantly being touched. Like my own daughters, like I will never not touch them. I never not hold them, kiss them. And boys, and this happened to me for sure, and not maliciously. It's just our culture says, rub some dirt in it. You need to stop crying. You need to man up or whatever. Is that where we start losing that capability to feel our emotions? Because we're having big feels, and no one's telling us you're having big feels. They're telling us stop having big feels. Is that where the switch starts to happen?
Yeah, I think there's three parts to this for me. One, the research that you're talking about, there's actually a good amount of research on this, that boys will receive 50% less touch by the age of 3 than girls. 50, so half as much.
3
at the age of 3. I have a 4.5-year-old. That little dude still needs a lot of physical touch. He needs to be picked up and held. And, he still wants me to carry him around sometimes. And when he's hurt, he wants to be held. I want dad to pick me up. So, but by the age of 3, one, I think there's social conditioning that most men know that. I don't want to explain this without going too wild into it. Most men know that men are the physical enforcers of rule and law in the world. And most men know that in order to become a man, you have to be able to in some way reconcile with your own physical nature and your own physical power. And so for a lot of parents, mothers and fathers, when a boy gets reactive, depending on the parent, they'll have a different response. So some fathers, it's sort of like, deal with it, suck it up. You shouldn't be crying. Don't feel that, because what they're trying to do is hone that young boy into a kind of toughness and resiliency, but the method is incorrect, right? The intention is good, but the method is incorrect, right? The intention is, I want to help you become emotionally resilient. Great, no problem. In the method, not good, right? No. Don't feel what you're feeling instead of what's happening, So when my son goes into a tantrum or he gets super angry, I have a practice with him where I'll sit him down in front of me. We'll cross our legs, we'll hold hands, we'll look each other in the eye, and I'll say, what's happening inside of your body?
Beautiful.
And he'll say, I just feel so angry, right? Or I feel tense, and I've taught him about, like what stress is and stuff like that. And so he'll use some of that vocabulary. And so I'm helping him to develop the awareness of what's happening inside of him. So I think for a lot of young boys, they have been taught the opposite. They've been taught, ignore what's happening inside of you. Don't develop awareness. Don't develop understanding of what's happening inside of you. Just start to push that down. Because again, strength equals suppression, or suppression equals strength, right? So then I think on the other hand, socially, I think socially we've just, conditioned young boys to deal with their emotions in a maladaptive way. And and then I think lastly, I think that men generally carry a more intensity inside of them.
I agree.
And I think for a lot of parents, they don't know what to do with that intensity,
Right.
And so a boy starts to grow up and he, 6, 7, 8 years old, 10 years old. And all of a sudden, it's not like, no, I don't want to do that. It's, it's almost like a threat of physical force. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. And you're going to make me.
Right.
And so I think for a lot of parents, mothers especially, they know that at some point they can't physically make their son do that.
Hmm.
And for fathers, they're stuck in this position of how do I get my son to whatever you want to say, to comply, to go along with, to agree, to whatever word you want to use that resonates with you. How do I get him to agree to what needs to be done without physical force
Hmm.
when he's meeting me with an
Hmm.
intensity of try it,
Exactly. Yeah.
and so it is a dance, it is
Mhm.
a dance. It's like when you look in the animal kingdom, lions, tigers, bears, wolves, etc., all of the mammals, as the young male cubs start to come of age, they naturally become more aggressive.
Mhm.
And we sometimes don't treat ourselves as mammals, which is really fucked up. Like it's really strange that we as human beings are mammals and we acknowledge that, but we don't treat ourselves as such. We are still mammals.
Mm.
And so when young boys start to grow up, they have an intensity inside of them. And anybody that's raised boys knows this. They can be feral, they can be wild, they can be, uncontrollable. They also seem to have very big and robust emotions. And some of the data and the research verifies this, that young boys actually have bigger, stronger, more intense emotional experiences than young girls do.
I agree.
So I think for all of those reasons, um, it's just a precarious position. And so if you as a parent don't have any understanding of what's happening inside of you, you're just going to respond from that unconscious place, right?
Mhm.
I'm not allowed to feel my feelings. I'm not allowed, that's a threat to me for
Mhm.
me to go into how I'm feeling. So I'm
Mhm.
just going to naturally shut yours down.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I'll probably leave it there. There's many other things, but I think that's probably enough.
No, that makes complete sense. And I see this when I drop my daughter off at school, and then sort of this is anecdata, just my observations. I don't see a lot of the girls having a hard time leaving the parents. I oftentimes see the little boys breaking down, like, I don't want to leave. And their parents are like, "No, you can do it." And they're all logical and like, but I'll be back. And, blah, blah. And they're not connecting and giving him a hug and like
Yeah.
soothing him and like trying to like logic him. And dude's like in kindergarten, like he's not gonna get that. Or then at my daughter's jujitsu class, the boys are always crying and the girls are like whatever, and like tapping boys out. And they're just
Yeah.
crying. And like, yeah, there's that big feel and that intensity. I think you nailed it.
Yeah. So I think it's more commonplace and natural of a response to when when a girl is having an emotional reaction or just a big reaction,
Mhm.
for us to naturally meet it with a more compassionate, more physically soothing response.
Yeah.
Whereas because what so many of us have been conditioned to is that when a man is upset like that, that's dangerous.
Mm.
And so most people unconsciously, even with boys, meet their response with that perception of threat, right?
Mm.
That boy is dysregulated. I need to teach him immediately to shut that down because one day that's going to be dangerous, right? If we carry that forward. And so I think that's what happens for a lot of young boys is that they're met with that response.
Mhm.
And I think that generationally, when we don't have to go super deep into this, but I think generationally we've been raised by very traumatized men.
For sure. Mhm.
You think about like my grandfather fought in World War II. He came back, definitely had PTSD. He
Mm.
raised three boys. My dad and my two uncles. And knowing what I know, I can see what that was like for them. I hear the stories. I heard my grandfather's stories of what he went through. I hear their stories of what they experienced growing up with my grandfather. And I mean, as an example, my uncle, one of my dad's brothers, his oldest brother, just passed away. Actually,
Mm.
he'd been battling ALS for
Oh
a
man,
long time. It's brutal, brutal disease.
brutal. Yeah.
And 2 years ago, I sat down with him and interviewed him, and I did a big interviewed him about his life, and have created this memorial for him that I'm going to send out to the family.
Wow.
But I got insight into what that was like, and so I think we just have generations of men that were raised by men that went off to war and were told, "Suck it up, stuff it down, cut yourself off from any feelings and emotions to go and fight." And that response to your internal landscape and feelings and emotions was just brought back and used as the main parenting method for young boys.
Mm.
And that became the way that in most of the world, in the West, certainly, especially in North America, that a lot of young boys were raised, suck it up, stuff, don't cry, big boys don't cry, etc. And so I think we're undoing that, and we're moving to a place where we teach emotional resiliency not through avoidance and ignorance of what is happening inside of a young boy, but actually a mastery. And
Mm.
mastery requires you to be with the palette of your emotions. It requires you to understand and have a depth of relationship with what's happening inside of you. That produces mastery. Avoidance never produces mastery. You cannot be a masterful artist by never picking up a paintbrush and painting on the canvas. You can never do that. But we as men have this faulty perception that we can become one day emotionally masterful by simply avoiding what we're experiencing. And then we get pissed off when that never works.
Absolutely. And it seems like it can go to a lot of anger, or then the collapsed man that we talk about
Yeah.
in attachment. Um, hard left to, well, maybe it's not too hard, but I want to talk about. I love the podcast you did recently on the Tyler Durden complex. This all relates to that. And also, I don't know if it's the same, but it reminds me of Trevor Boehm's Marlboro Man versus the sensitive New Age guy.
Hmm.
You have Tyler Durden maybe being the Marlboro Man, and then Edward Norton's character being the sensitive New Age guy. I don't even remember his name in the movie.
He doesn't have a name. That's the
He doesn't.
beauty. He's just
God,
called
yeah,
he's just called the narrator.
the
He
narrator.
doesn't even have, he represents the hollow man, right? He doesn't even have a fucking name. It's great.
It's. I still been meaning to read the book. Chuck Flaniuk. I think he's from Portland, so sort of a claim to fame for out here. It seems like all that we've talked about could lead to either Trevor's dichotomy there, or the Tyler Durden complex of some sort, or the just the nice guy, or the Marlboro Man. I guess maybe say more about Tyler Durden, the complex, because I thought it was just amazing. And if people haven't listened to the episode, they can go to your podcast, but maybe briefly jump
Thanks, man.
in.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that I didn't necessarily talk about in that episode that I'd love to bring in, that I'm doing a different episode on, which is
Right.
really about the death of the archetypal father within our culture. And when the father dies, what is uh, uh, what the impact of that is, or what the outcome of that is, are those two male archetypes, right? The sort of spineless, can't stand up for himself, caught up in the hollowness of modernity, right? I mean, Edward Norton's characters, the famous scene of him sitting on the toilet, ordering from, I think, IKEA.
Yeah.
This line of like that's like the amalgamation of his identity. That's who he is, right? The sort of like
Mhm.
IKEA man. And then this sort of beautiful juxtaposition of Tyler Durden, who really is his shadow, right? Like
Yeah,
that's his shadow,
100%.
and is the embodiment of everything that he's not. And you can see in our culture and society today that those two archetypal men are everywhere. They are fucking everywhere. And
Split off.
it's why that movie was so powerful, and so powerful still, like 20 years later, is
Absolutely.
that not much has changed, because the decay of the father, the decay of the archetypal father happened, decades ago. And
Mhm.
I think we're just reaching this place where, you could maybe make a case that he's almost entirely dead. That within our culture, the archetype of the father, the one that holds the fabric of truth and order and
Mm,
structure and what is right and the
mm.
direction of where you can go as a man, none of that really exists anymore.
Do you think
It's
it's the demonization of the patriarchy? Is that where it's gone in
Yeah,
reverse?
I think part of it is the rise of more authoritarian figures. And
Mhm,
it's not a comment on Trump. It's just that
right,
that has become, you look at the Andrew Tates of the world,
mhm,
they are more, um, they're almost completely devoid of any type of empathy. Right. And
right,
that's what happens with Tyler Durden, is that the other guy, the narrator, is this sort of very meek, um, weakened man, because he's been hollowed out by modernity that has told him that your highest value is to just produce and consume, right? Produce whatever it is that he does in his job, crunching numbers, and then consume in return, and that's your highest form, that's your highest value as a man.
oh boy,
And Tyler Durden's character is the antithesis of that, right? He's the rebel. He's the burn it all down, be completely arrogant, don't give a shit about other people, and bring your primal nature back online with such ferocity that it's undeniable and unignorable. You cannot ignore it. So in our culture now, what you see is a lot of men filtering into those camps. You
mhm,
have the men who don't have aim, they don't have direction, they're very confused, they can't stand up for themselves, they can't stand up to women, they don't have a voice to express what they need, what they want, they don't even really know what they need or they want. And on the other side of that, you have hostility and aggression and frustration and anger and like F it, burn the system down. And
mhm,
that's what happens when the archetypal father collapses. And I think in many ways, love him or hate him, this is why Jordan Peterson, for a period of time, had this like meteoric rise into the public space.
right,
It's because he embodied for many people the cultural archetypal father figure, right? He stood for order. He stood for structure. Again, whether or
mm,
not you agreed with him or like him is not the point. It's that from an archetypal standpoint, he was filling a void that was so felt by the men of the culture that immediately everybody flocked to him.
mhm,
Immediately. Because it was
mhm,
like, oh my God, and I think it was funny because for a lot of people, it's like, why is this guy so popular? He's telling people to stand up straight and like make your bed and the stupid shit. And it's like, well, that's how void of masculine energy and fatherly energy the average man actually is. That's how
mhm,
devoid our culture is, our society is, and the average individual man is. Like 1 in 4 kids are going to grow up in America without a father present in the house.
wow,
1 in 4, right? 25%. And when you look at the data, that disproportionately affects young boys and young men, like
mhm,
way more than it affects young girls,
mhm,
because they then lack any type of vision of direction, of an aim of who they can become as a man. And so I think we need a new story. I think we need a new story. I think that the archetype of the father needs to be rebirthed. It needs to be reborn into our culture and into our society. The problem is that in certain political ideologies, the patriarch, and
right,
when I say patriarch, I'm not talking about patriarchy institutions. I'm talking about the conflation with institutions with fatherhood, with the
yes,
patriarch of the father,
exactly,
has been villainized to such a degree that
mhm,
the majority of men do not want to even enter into that arena, and
yeah,
it's, I've dubbed this the patriarchy virus. I've talked about it before. Some people don't like it, but The patriarchy virus is simply the belief that the patriarchy is the fundamental evil and root of all the problems in Western culture and society. And
Mm,
that is a belief system that many people hold. And the byproduct of that, the outcome of that, unfortunately, is that you not only erode quote unquote patriarchal structures, but the downstream effect of that is that you start to collapse and sort of poison the water of
mm,
patriarch, of father, right?
mhm,
Because patriarch just means under the arc of the father, patros archi,
mhm.
right? Archi is the arc, and then patros is the father. And so what it essentially is supposed to mean is that we have to uphold the role of the father. We have to have reverence for the role of the father. And matriarchy is just the opposite of that, right? It's upholding the matriarch, the mother. And
Mhm.
so we have to have reverence and admiration for those things. But so I think that's wildly problematic.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
I usually see
What are your thoughts?
I just see a lot of guys just like opting out of like living, like they're, man, especially like the dating world. A lot of guys come in like, I'm scared to date. A lot of approach avoidance, and they're afraid to be canceled or told they're creepy, or if they, like, they're, especially the younger crowd, like they're told like, hey, if you're a man, you're bad. And that's kind of the message they internalize. Like, if I have a penis, I'm bad. Well, can't really help that. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? So they just kind of opt out or avoid, or they do the opposite. They just rage out. And this is what we're seeing right now.
Well, it's the repackaging of original sin, right?
Mm,
Original sin in Catholicism and Christianity says you're born with sin,
you're
and your
born bad.
work is to confess from that sin and repent from it and
Mhm.
heal that. And that's been repackaged in certain ideological
Right.
sects that say men have original sin, boys have original sin. You're born with
Right.
the predisposition towards aggression, violence,
Mhm.
etc. Right? This is where um, yeah, I mean, we I don't need to go down that path too hard, but it's the repackaging of original sin that says women don't have that. Women aren't inherently this way. It's
Mhm.
just men that are that way. And
Mhm.
so a lot of men and boys have grown up in an environment where either the women in their life have been telling them that they're dangerous and that there's something wrong with them and that they need to sniff out their toxic masculinity and just change that, and then they can be a good acceptable man for society.
That cold got you.
Yeah, the cough got me. um, that they need to purge themselves and purify themselves of all their toxic masculine traits. And once they do that, then they'll be a good, acceptable man. And then, I do think that there has been such a divergence of values between men and women across the political spectrum that it's making it very hard for men and women to be in relationship. So I don't know if you saw the research that came out last year that showed the values of men and women who voted Republican and men and women who voted Democrat. But for men who voted Republican, their number one highest value was to have children.
Amazing, right? What a
And
switch.
and for women who voted Democrat, having kids was like second last on the list out of like 20 values. So you
Good.
just have this huge shift in discrepancy because for Democratic women, for more liberal, progressive women, the number one value is resource acquisition, is basically making money, becoming financially stable. And that takes precedent and priority far and above having kids, starting a family, having a relationship, et cetera.
Mhm.
So the values have diverged so much that for a lot of men, I know countless men that want to get married, that want to have kids,
Yes.
but they're actually, when they're dating, they're finding women that actually either don't want that, are unsure, don't know when they want to do that, don't know what that's going to look like. And there's just a lot of confusion on that. And that's not to blame women in any way, shape, or form. It's just to say that, statistically speaking, the values of people has radically changed. So I
Mhm.
think that makes things quite challenging.
Yeah, how the tables have turned.
Right.
It's so amazing. I don't know how we right the ship from that one, but I guess it's doing men's work. And a lot of guys, and when they go to the sort of the nice guy archetype, will have either no friends that are men, or they'll have lots of friends that are women, or it's just their spouse or girlfriend that's their best friend.
Yeah.
Because, masculinity is bad. And we don't want to go there. So we have to like kind of go feminine in a way. Like that's the move. A woman will like me if I'm more feminine and soft, and I've taken away my testosterone, and it's probably not inherently attractive to a woman, I'd imagine, but.
Well, I think that's part of the problem, is that we are in a time where largely what it means to be a man has been defined by women. And for the past few decades, one could argue that the majority of men have been trying to be men based on women's definitions.
I agree.
Based on what a woman in their life, or women socially and collectively, have said, here's how I think you should be as a man. And the problem with that is that, generally speaking, what that will produce is a man who has either completely disassociated from his anger, or is at the very least so disconnected from it that he doesn't have the inner agency to stand up for himself within the relationship.
Right.
And the other problem is that men and women, very rarely know what they actually want. We might say that we know what we want, but we don't actually know what we need. And I think that generally, as a rule of thumb for men, and hopefully this doesn't catch me too much flack, but I'll say it anyways. There's what women say they want, and then there's what women actually respond to in a relationship. And those two things are usually quite different.
Right.
And what's confusing for most men is, because we're so rational and linear and logical, we hear women saying, here's exactly how we want you to be. And a man tries to create an identity that conforms to what that woman says. And then he becomes that, and then she breaks up with him. Or then the divorce happens. And he's like, but wait, I was trying to be the man that you said you wanted me to be. And she's like, there's all the reasons, right? Well, I didn't want you to be that for me. I wanted you to be that for you, or, whatever the reason is. And so you kind of have to start to, yes, hear what women are saying, right? If you look at the data, women still want kind men. Being an asshole probably isn't great. But you have to start to look at, what do they respond to in a relationship? And this is where understanding how to read your own emotions, how to understand what's happening inside of you physically and emotionally, is incredibly important. Because the more mastery and understanding and awareness you have over your own domain, physically and emotionally, the more you are going to be able to attune to a woman, and the more you're going to be able to provide containment for a woman, and the more you're going to be able to read the natural signals that are there that are not verbal, right? It's like we all have heard the saying, communication is 80% nonverbal. Well, what the fuck does that mean? It means that the majority of it is in your body. Your body is communicating things that that the other person's brain is picking up. And that is incredibly important. A man needs to be able to tune into the data and the information from a woman's body and nonverbal communication in order to really understand what is working and what's not working in a relationship. And I think that's where so many men get lost. This is why you see this huge movement online of women being like, we want emotionally mature men. I'm not going to put up with this emotionally immature men. What they're really saying is, these men just do not have the ability to tune into what's happening in my body. They don't have a fucking clue. And so they're checked out, and they're running around, trying to conform to or shape themselves into something, but they're missing the mark. And men are frustrated because they're like, I'm doing all this work and it's still not working.
Exactly.
And really what women are saying is, if you get into your body as a man, it solves a lot of problems. Because a man who's in his body, a man who's connected to his emotions, he is naturally going to be safer. He's going to feel safer to a woman than a man who is disconnected from his emotions and his body. Because when you're disconnected from your emotions and your body, you feel like a threat to a woman because
Correct.
you do not come across energetically or emotionally or intellectually or physically as somebody that has an understanding of what's happening inside of them. And for a woman, that's a threat, right?
Mhm.
If you are, as a man, don't know what's going on inside of you, then either I have to be the one to point it out, which puts me in a
Mhm.
maternal role,
Mhm.
or I have to be on alert trying to figure out, like, do I need to dodge a bullet? Are you going to get super pissed off? Are you going to blow up? Are you going to shut down and disconnect from the relationship? Are you going to threaten the relationship? So there's a lot of, I think women call it emotional labor. There's a lot of work that
Yeah,
then happens on a woman's side to try and figure out, like, what is happening inside of you because you don't know.
correct. Or they just stop and say the cliche, happy wife, happy life.
Oh my God.
Good luck with that one.
I hate that one.
Me too.
That might be my
Your button.
all-time favorite, least favorite saying. Yeah.
It's so bad. It's such a bad setup.
Yeah.
That's really amazing information. And I think getting around men and talking about this too is super important. And men's groups making more male friends. And you have the Alliance, which is really cool, where you can do this online. Traver Boehm has the Uncivilized Nation. I mean, go to an Al-Anon meeting if you have to. Just get around men, do things.
Yeah.
But we're isolated, and it's not a good move. So we covered dating. Let's move to. We've got a bunch of Q&As
Do
or
it.
questions from my practice and from my Alliance.
I have a few extra minutes after too, so if we go a couple minutes over, that's no worries.
Oh, heck yeah, because I'm sure these are gonna make you go down some rabbit holes, which is awesome. I love it.
I have said that, like, my brevity is not my strong suit. Brevity is not. I'm like, let's go as deep into this fucking thing as humanly possible.
I love it.
Bottom of the ocean type of guy.
I think we both have a little bit of the ADD stuff going on. So
Yeah.
Tangenting is our specialty.
I recently, my wife got me a new espresso machine for Christmas, and I've been joking around that it's subtly activated my minor autism in this in this in the sense that, like, I have become so, like, fixated on dialing in my espresso routine in the morning and, like,
Yeah.
how I make an espresso shot and, like, perfecting the whole thing, And I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah, all you can think about is espresso.
That's right. Yeah. It's just like, it has to be perfect.
Exactly. Pros and cons. Yeah, all right. First one. How do you cope with someone or even multiple people in your life who insist on repeatedly villainizing or pathologizing you and making you the bad guy?
Be the bad guy. Be okay with it.
Mhm.
It's you probably don't like it because you have an image of yourself that says that you need to be the nice guy. You need to be the guy that's liked. Um, generally, what I would say is set boundaries with the pathologization. That's never helpful. I think that online, it's kind of become commonplace for people to label other people online, like, oh, you're such a narcissist, you're such an avoidant attached person, you're such a, I think when you're in relationship with other people, that is just not helpful. Being pathologized by a friend, by a significant other, by a family member, it's not helpful. It doesn't go anywhere. It's kind of like, telling an addict that they're an addict does nothing. It literally does jack shit. And we
Right.
all know that, but we still do it
Right.
because we are wanting to create change. So be okay with being the villain in some people's eyes. That's actually okay. There's some people that don't like me, they don't like my style, they don't like what I do.
Mhm.
That's all right. The detriment to some men is that they cannot hold being disliked.
Yeah.
And so my feedback for whoever wrote this question or whoever resonates with it is begin to expand your tolerance and your capacity for being disliked by other people,
Mhm.
because you actually need to risk being disliked in order to set a boundary, in
There we go.
order to say, hey, I actually don't like when you do that. I'm not okay with it. And I don't want you to do that anymore.
Mhm.
I'm not okay with you pathologizing me or labeling me. I'm not all right with you continuing to see me as the unequivocal villain. And it's a bigger problem because socially, the oppressed oppressor dynamic has become so powerful and so commonplace that I see it filtering into couples and relationships and
Mm.
friendships where couples, will take on this dynamic. And it happens naturally where a couple gets into a dynamic and one person's an over functioner and one person's an under functioner. And so one person always feels like they're doing more and the other person feels like they're all, can never meet up the other person's expectations. But it's warped now into this oppressed dynamic, the victim villain dynamic. And sometimes the only way out of that is a little bit more through it. So you actually have to be willing to say, I'm not okay with this anymore. I'm sure that I'm contributing to some of the dysfunction in our relationship. And I want to do my part to
Mhm.
understand what that is. But I also need you to do your part in being able to maybe see why you need me to be the villain, why you
Mhm.
need to gain power
Mhm.
and position relationally between the two of us by pathologizing me.
Mhm.
So it's maybe not the answer that that person is looking for, but that's what I've seen to be the most effective, because any type of defense around that, any type of trying to prove your way out of it, it's like a Chinese finger trap.
Yeah.
Anytime you use defensiveness in that type of dynamic where somebody feels like they are a victim to you and you are the fundamental problem in the relationship and they're labeling you, when you try and defend yourself, it for them, it just feels like you're proving their point more,
Yes.
and it tightens the finger trap and tightens the perception that that person holds. So you have to be willing to move a little bit more into that, dare I say, villain archetype
Mhm.
of, I'm actually not okay with this.
Mhm. Reminds me of that book, The Courage to Be Disliked. Have you heard of that book before?
I have, yeah, I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
It's pretty good. It's Adlerian psychology,
Hmm.
which is kind of not really talked about a lot, which is interesting. Let's see. What is your framework for facing the hidden and rejected aspects of yourself that lead to self-sabotage, anxiety, and depression? I think we kind of talked about it already, but let's have it again.
What is the framework?
Yeah. What is your your personal framework when you work with somebody who has hidden and rejected aspects of yourself? It's basically probably shadow work. I'm sure that's where you're going
Hmm.
to go.
Hmm.
I'm self-sabotaging. I have anxiety, depression. I can't seem to change it. I can't face it. What do I do?
Assume that you don't want to, step one.
Mhm.
Start to see what you're getting out of it. Step two, you are
Mhm.
getting something beneficial out of
Mhm.
that behavior.
Correct.
And so what you're getting out of it is probably something that you needed in order to fit in or survive in your family system growing up. It's very likely that you had to adapt that way of being in order to fit a narrative or a story that one or both of your caretakers held of you.
Mhm.
The next thing is beginning to go through, that process of admission. So get a really good therapist, counselor, psychologist, coach that is able to hold you through the process of turning towards the disowned, unliked parts of you. And I really mean having a guide through that is important. Anytime you're doing shadow work, you should be doing that in tandem with a skilled practitioner.
I'm so
Um,
glad you said that because there's so much stuff on Instagram about do your shadow work and well,
yeah.
good luck.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Good luck. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and look, I think it's a Nietzsche quote where it's like you should look in the abyss to see the monster, but don't look for too long, otherwise you'll become it.
Mhm.
There is a risk in shadow work in the sense that if you aren't doing it in a skilled way, in a conscious way with somebody, the shadow can take over parts of your personality in a way that aren't good, and that aren't going to continue to support you and the life that you ultimately want to have. So you want to have a skilled practitioner that's there that works with you. And the you want somebody there to work with because you aren't going to want to acknowledge those parts of you. There's a reason why you've hid those parts of you from yourself. So
Exactly.
sometimes we need an external source to like, I mean, I was on Chris Williamson's show for the fourth time recently, and he has this great saying, great therapy is like somebody coming into your house and taking you of a tour of your house and helping you to find a room in the house that you didn't even know existed.
I love that.
That's what great therapy does. So
Mhm.
you kind of, and that's what shadow work is, right? So don't assume that you can find, there's kind of an arrogance and an omnipotence that some people hold of like, I should be able to self-discover everything under the sun and deal with this by myself. Incorrect. That's fundamentally wrong.
Agreed.
We need external support sometimes to really get into the muck with some of these things. And
Mhm.
then, I think lastly is exploring what you're genuinely afraid of. What are you afraid of about yourself? What are you afraid of with regards to your anxiety? What are you afraid of with regards to your depression? What are you afraid of with regards to your insecurities? Like, what is the genuine fear that is there? And can you begin to move towards that fear in an incremental way where you systematically reduce the amount of fear that you experience, but also start to develop a higher level of tolerance to
Yeah.
those things, and begin to actually welcome certain attributes that you've discarded into the shadow back into your personality. And I don't
Mhm.
know what those things are. If you're anxious, it's likely risk taking and resiliency. That's very, very common that people that are very anxious are afraid of taking a risk. They're afraid of looking embarrassed. They're afraid of, there's an anxiousness around their internal experience carrying on indefinitely, or, some iteration of that. And so you have to be willing to face some of that fear head on, but you need
Right.
to do it in an incremental way. The biggest pitfall I see so many men falling into is when they start to do shadow work, they start to turn towards these fears, they start to like maybe integrate some anger if they've disconnected from it, or they start to grieve because they've disconnected from it, is they they want to like do the biggest, they expect themselves to do the biggest, most terrifying thing, And so they think that they should be able to be a black belt when they're just starting at the white belt level. And then they shit on themselves for not being able to do that. So just do it incrementally, face the fears incrementally, start to reveal things incrementally, and work with somebody that can sort of guide you through that process of doing it in a step-by-step way so that they don't blow your system out. Because
Mhm.
I do think that with things like shadow work, you can go too fast too soon.
Mhm.
You can go too deep too quickly, and uh, that can be harmful.
100%. I sometimes use the buy-in with people in my practice, the concept of the golden shadow.
Mhm.
So there's good that can come from that too. And you probably explain it better than I can. Do you do you use that when you're working with shadow work?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all it can all be alchemized into gold. I think that's the beauty of the shadow. Like the
Yeah.
purpose of Jungian, the reason why I'm so pro Jung, the reason why I think he really was a mind unlike many was he gave a kind of map, a territory map of how to reclaim the rejected parts of us that we had to cut ourselves off from in order to fit in, belong, survive, etc. growing up.
Mhm.
And it's in that reclamation process that we find the treasure, right? It's in reclaiming the anger or reclaiming the compassion for yourself, right? So many men that I work with, their inner dialogue is violent, hostile, abusive, and
Yeah.
it's because they've sort of annexed their sense of self-compassion. They have zero self-compassion.
Mhm.
And so you have to reclaim some of those things. And so all of those elements can really be gold. And the gold in the shadow is the parts of yourself that are needed and necessary for you to feel more whole, more complete,
Mhm.
more robust, more resilient, etc.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a beautiful theory. We can geek out on Jungian stuff for hours, I'm sure. Guy's amazing. Let's see, next one. After being hurt at the end of a marriage or relationship, how can a man get back to a place of being able to truly connect with and trust his next partner? This is specifically coming from a man I'm working with who's had a terrible relationship with his mom, more than likely borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, maybe narcissism, I'm not sure. He was terrorized. And as we know, sometimes we marry our parents, and he's gone through 2 marriages, and the first one was pretty bad, pretty much married a replica of his mom. Second one, a little bit better. Now he's gotten into a relationship and she's actually nice to him and like asks him what he wants and doesn't want anything from him. And it feels unsafe and weird. And he's like, he doesn't want to, he's like, I want this, but I'm holding back. I can't trust this. And he does have a hard time like relinquishing that part of him that's like, I need to protect from the feminine at all costs. How does he break through?
I want to make this as simple as possible. When we have that type of break of safety with the feminine, we will have a break of safety with regards to our relationship to our body and our unconscious and our emotions. So, because again, within our psychological structure, our body and our emotions are feminine. That's where the feminine exists. That's why so many men are afraid of getting in touch with their body, of actually experiencing their own emotions, their own feelings, their own body, because it while we can be very powerful and strong in our body, it's still the place where we feel the softness of the world, of existence, of love, of joy, of loss, of grief, etc. So I think maybe 2 or 3 things would be helpful. The first is really beginning to attune yourself and setting your North Star towards internal safety, being able to really hone in on what does safety feel like for you? What pulls you out of physical safety? And you might start that process and notice that maybe you don't have a lot of reference for what physical safety actually feels like. And that should be a practice. Every single day, you should be practicing and kind of being like a detective for where safety shows up for you physically and somatically. Like, oh, here it is right now. I feel safe in this moment. I can feel it in my breath. I can feel it in my body. I can feel it in my feet, in my stomach, in my gut, in my chest. And just start to articulate it and write it down. Maybe keep like a little in your journal or on your iPhone in your notes. Just start to keep like a little note that just says safety, and start to write down what safety actually feels like for you so that you have a better articulation of what somatic, physical, and emotional safety feels like inside of yourself. Because if you're not able to acquire that awareness and understanding of safety inside of yourself, you'll never be able to fully understand whether you are truly safe with that woman or with any woman.
Yes.
Because the question will always be externalized rather than internalized. So the big piece of work for that individual and for anybody that sort of feels resonance with that, feels like they've lived a similar story in some ways, is to really get it's kind of like a tracker, like a tracker that's tracking down a deer or whatever they might be hunting, beginning to track and see the footprints of safety and understand really in a robust way, be able to articulate it. Like, when I feel safe, here's how my breath feels. When I feel emotionally safe, here's what's happening in my chest, to my heartbeat, to my abdomen. Here's what happens in my thoughts. Here's how my body feels. And I like this notion of, I call it a somatic screenshot.
Yeah.
And whenever I work with the man, he's gone through a huge piece of work. He usually will experience something internally for the first time. And I'll say, okay, take a somatic screenshot. Try your best to remember every aspect and element of what this feels like in your body, the temperature, where there's ease, where there's peace, what your breath feels like, the rise and fall of your belly and your chest, and really acclimate yourself and marinate in that physical experience so that you can always come back to it, so that you can return to that place and so that you know what it feels like. And then see, as you start to get a sense of what that feels like, then see if you can bring that safety to her and to the relationship. Because my guess is that that man is probably has a bit of a hypervigilance towards whether or not he is safe. And like you were saying, when things are safe, it feels like a threat because it's foreign. Again,
Yep.
things that are foreign psychologically will be labeled and constituted as a threat in your brain. So that's a good sign. It's a good sign. But instead of trying to externalize and get that safety from her, you need to acclimate to that inside of yourself.
Spot on. This one will probably be easy. How does one move through grief and rumination to look towards the future and leave the past behind? This guy's kind of stuck. How do we get unstuck?
One, I think you should probably choose, maybe not schedule grief, but I think you should actively decide to grieve. I think that grief for a lot of men, especially when they feel stuck, it's almost like they're waiting for some geyser or eruption to happen, some volcano to happen inside of them that will clear the slate out, that will allow them to move on. And it doesn't come, it doesn't happen. I remember after my mom died 2 years ago, it was a bit of an interesting thing because grief would come. There would be moments where it would just arise naturally, but I could tell that there was a depth to the grief that I wasn't touching, that I wasn't actually tapping into. And so I had to consciously choose to make time to go and say, this is me spending time with my grief right now. I'm choosing to move towards my grief. And for most men, that is a very confronting experience. And so I would say carve out time specifically to be with your grief and see if you can be in a beautiful place or in a place where you at least feel safe to move into your grief. Because when we allow grief to fully happen, that sometimes for the majority of people that I've seen is the releasing of the shackles that's keeping us stuck in the past. Right. And so it's that there's a depth of the grief that man, he probably knows he needs to access or wants to access. And until he does, he's going to have one foot back in the past, unable to let go of it. And that's just the grief saying, you need to honor this, and you need to honor this. And it might take a little bit longer than you want. So that's honoring the grief. And then, I don't want to give anything else because I think that's probably sufficient.
Fair enough. I agree. All right. 2 more. How do I change or outgrow the remaining negative feelings and actions embedded from my relationship with my developed father image, getting Jungian, that I see manifesting my own behavior and actions as a father of my own children? This sort of reminds me of the Jung quote, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents.
Yeah. Can you read the first part of his question?
Sure. How do I change or outgrow the remaining negative feelings and actions embedded from my relationship with his own internalized father image from manifesting onto his children?
Yeah. This is probably going to be uncomfortable, and maybe at first for this individual or for any man, you might not immediately have an answer for it. And so again, I want you to look for the detection of where it shows up. But I would encourage you to really pay attention to where you are jealous of your son. And what you are specifically jealous that he has that maybe you were missing growing up.
Interesting.
And for a lot of fathers, and I've had to contend with this myself, but for a lot of fathers whose dad was absent or abusive or, spineless or whatever it was, when they become a dad, if they're really tuned in and which it sounds like this guy is, and he really wants to be an exceptional father to his kid,
He does.
the byproduct of that is that two things will happen. Number one, he will pressurize the living shit out of himself to be exceptional. And that will pressurize the relationship and the dynamic. It'll strain the dynamic. Does he have a son or a daughter, or is that unknown?
He has a son and a stepdaughter.
Okay. So specifically with his son, it'll pressurize that relationship with his son because he'll be operating from a place of the expectations of who he wants his son to be. And he'll unconsciously, and this is what I've seen so many times, he will unconsciously be operating from a place of the jealousy of the fact that his son is getting the fathering that he ultimately wanted.
Mm.
And so there's a kind of grief in there that needs to be contended with of, wow, I really am, and an acknowledgement, I really am giving my son the type of fathering that I deeply wanted. So there's a joy there, but also there's a grief that shows up that you didn't get that. And also there's the jealousy of, sometimes my guess is that, because I've seen this with many, many men, that there's an anger that shows up that's actually a jealousy. And the anger, the sort of irritation with the son, the short temper with the son is a kind of jealousy of, how could you act this way? Don't you know how good you have it? If
Right.
I had this type of fathering, I wouldn't have had any issues, right? It's wrong. It's not correct. You still would have acted out.
Right.
But there's a jealousy there. And so really relating to that space of jealousy and understanding it, like, what are you actually jealous about? And then tuning into the fear of being an imperfect dad, and being fallible and having faults, and being honest about what those things are, and finding ways for you to depressurize the dynamic between you and your son. Because again, it's very likely that your son is probably happier and more connected than you expect. Like 9.9 times out of 10, when I work with these types of fathers, their son is very happy with them, loves them, looks up to them, reveres them. But it is the self-imposed expectations of the father that's crippling him and then interfering with the relationship.
Beautiful answer. Last one. How do I overcome the fear of letting my spouse down about promises made to take care of them and to protect them from other family members and financial challenges? This guy's carrying the weight of the world and not carrying his own internal world.
It's tough because some of it's a little ambiguous of like protecting her from other family members and finances. But what I'll say is, it really sounds like there is a fear of disappointing her in general. And I think the best thing that you could do is start to build more resiliency and tolerance for disappointing her. And honestly, if any man that is dealing with this, that has a hard time disappointing his girlfriend or his wife, I love giving this assignment, and men absolutely freaking hate it, which is go and actively do something to disappoint her. On purpose. Do it on purpose.
Terrifying.
Right? It's terrifying. But again, if you're doing it in a contained dynamic, right? Because it sounds like this guy is working with somebody, then you have the support to go and disappoint her, and then understand what that was like, and understand what comes up, and kind of be with the emotional response and the physical response, and begin to build that tolerance for, it's okay when I let her down. It's okay if she's disappointed. And then you will likely have more energetic freedom and vitality and strength to deal with some of the real challenges that are happening with the family and the finances. Can you read it one more time? Because I feel like I missed something that I wanted to say.
For sure. How do I overcome the fear of letting my spouse down about promises made to take care of them and protect them from other family members that, may be doing harm, and the financial challenges of being the breadwinner and not letting her down? It's like, I'm not making enough money. I'm not being the provider. These kind of dynamics.
Yeah. Okay. I think the other piece is like, why do you think you're the fundamental problem in the relationship?
Mm.
It really sounds like, my guess is that this man grew up in a environment where he felt like he was the problem, and
Bingo.
that if only he was different, then the family system wouldn't have been whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And that dynamic is playing out again in this relationship. And marriage, are they married?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that dynamic's playing out again in the relationship, right? You perceive yourself to be the fundamental problem. And if only you weren't the problem, then things would be great. And it puts you in the position of getting to continue to take on all of the dysfunction that might be happening and all the disconnection that might be happening in the relationship. So I would explore that part. So number one, homework assignment, go, go and disappoint her intentionally. Again, do something small. Don't miss her birthday. Don't not buy her something for Valentine's Day. Like, do something small, but do it intentionally. You can let her in on it afterwards if you want. Like, there's ways to do this. Don't tell her that you're going to do that.
Right.
Don't like give a heads up, like, I'm going to disappoint you on purpose. Like, that's probably going to cause some chaos. But you have to start to build a greater level of tolerance for having somebody disappoint you, and specifically the people that you really love and care about, because it's likely not just with her that this shows up. And then the second piece is really getting clear on why is it that you feel and perceive that you need to be the problem in relationships, and what would need to happen for you to move out of that role? What does he think needs to happen to move
Mhm.
out of that role? What conversations need to be had? What decisions need to be made? Because there are very likely conversations and decisions and truths that this man needs to own right now that he's not, because he doesn't think he's allowed to, because he's the problem.
Mhm.
And so by owning those things, I need this, I'm not okay with this, I'd like more of this in the relationship, by owning those things, it moves him out of, I'm the fundamental problem with this relational dynamic, and he's collapsing under the weight of that. And that's how you create escape velocity out of it.
I like that. Well, we should probably land the plane so you can get to your next podcast. I just want to recognize you for all you do. You're an amazing human. You changed my life. And I think you're doing such a great service to men, and we need it so bad. In the world of, we'll take anything, like, well, here's Andrew Tate, or here's an incel community or whatever. Thank you for being here. You personally and Traver Boehm have really helped me, and I think you guys are doing great things. And of course, our Jedi Master, Dewey Freeman,
You bet.
and our mutual friend, Michael Gay, doing good things for the world. So thank you so much. Where shall people best go to find you? I think your Alliance program is freaking amazing. I know Traver has the Uncivilized Nation. Where should people go if they want to dip their toe in, or go a little bit more in, or just cannonball?
That's great. That's great. It's just Man Talks everywhere. MANTALKS. Mantalks.com, Mantalks on Instagram. I've got a great YouTube channel. We've got a couple 100,000 subscribers on there. I've got content that comes out every week, and a lot of it's very practical and tactical that you can implement. So if you want to dip your toes in, then go check out some of my work. You could buy the book. You can check out the podcast. And then, if you want to go in deeper, the Alliance, we've got 1,100 guys from around the world in the community now. And there's a ton of resources. There's courses in there, shadow work course, relationship course. There's pathways. I'm building out a whole new subset of work for men in there around building self-worth and going through relationship conflict and regulating your nervous system and all those different pieces. So that's coming in the next quarter. So you can check out the Alliance. And then if you want to cannonball in, definitely join the men's weekend. We have a men's weekend
Yes.
out in Texas in October. It's going to be the only one that I'm running this year because I'm moving my family. I've got 2 small kids. So six days away from the family. I'm trying to reduce that, but that's the one that we have going on in October of this year. So that's the best place to go. Super deep work. It's awesome.
I agree. That's what I did. I cannonballed and went right to that, and it was amazing.
Awesome.
I highly recommend everybody do that. Maybe once every couple years, even. I mean, it's good to do it again. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is classified, but are you writing book number 2?
I have my proposal in the works right now. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't signed a book deal, but I have the proposal in the works, and I won't give anything away. But the first one was for men. The second one is going to be for everybody, but more geared towards like guys that are exploring the line between greatness and addictive behaviors.
Ooh,
yeah,
very nice. That's intriguing. And for all the women out there, I want to give a shout out to your wife. Do you want to? Introduce her? Like,
Vienna.
Yeah, I mean, I always joke that your kids are going to be like the most well-adjusted humans on the face of the earth,
or they'll just be complete disasters, right? All
they'll push back hard.
It's a social experiment on like, does this therapy stuff actually work? You know,
right.
they're either going to be, they'll be like, they'll either just be like so well-adjusted and little champions, or I was going to make like a Burning Man comment, but that's probably unnecessary. It's just like running naked high on fucking LSD at Burning Man, or like every weekend at some new music festival with boas and shit.
Exactly.
We're all one.
That didn't pan out.
Yeah. What the hell happened over there? My wife, Vienna, she has a great Instagram account called Mindful MFT. And she's got a practice with like 10 or 12 clinicians that work with her, and they do marriage counseling and family therapy and relational counseling and individual counseling. So they have a ton of great resources, and she's just the most gifted writer. It is insane. She's such a good writer.
That book is great.
Or Origins of You. She wrote a book called The Origins of You. So definitely check that one out.
You're both good writers.
Thanks.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I could distill your tagline at the end. You got to man it forward. They always say that, which is brilliant. If this helped anybody, man it forward, or woman it forward, I guess you could say both. And hopefully we'll have a round 2 here in the future.
Absolutely.
This was spectacular. Do you have a few minutes afterwards to say goodbye?
You bet.
Okay, cool. I'm pushed up. So we'll see y'all later.